Knowledge and being. There are two lines along which man's development proceeds, the line of knowledge and the line of being. In right evolution, the line of knowledge and the line of being develop simultaneously, parallel to and helping one another. However, if the line of knowledge gets too far ahead of the line of being, or the line of being gets ahead of the line of knowledge, then man's development goes wrong, and sooner or later it must come to a standstill. People understand what knowledge means, and they understand the possibility of different levels of knowledge. They understand that knowledge may be lesser or greater, that is to say of one quality or of another quality. But they do not understand this in relation to being. Being for them means simply existence, to which is opposed just non-existence. They do not understand that being or existence may be of very different levels and categories. Take for example the being of a mineral and the being of a plant. It is a different being. The being of a plant and of an animal is again a different being. The being of an animal and of a man is a different being. However, the being of two different people can differ from one another more than the being of a mineral and of an animal. This is exactly what people do not understand. They also do not understand that knowledge depends upon being. Not only do they fail to understand, but also wish not to understand it, particularly in Western culture where it is considered that man possesses great knowledge. He may, for example, be an able scientist, make discoveries, advance science, but at the same time he may be, and has the right to be, a petty, egotistical, cavilling, mean, envious, vain, naive and absent-minded person. It seems taken for granted in the West that a professor must forget his umbrella everywhere. Yet is it his being, and people think that his knowledge does not depend upon his being. People of Western culture put great value on the level of a person's knowledge, but they do not value the level of one's being, and are not ashamed of the low level of their own being. They do not understand what this even means, and do not understand that an individual's knowledge depends upon the level of their being. If knowledge gets far ahead of being, it becomes theoretical and abstract, inapplicable to life and/or actually harmful. Instead of serving life and helping people the better to struggle with the difficulties they meet, it begins to complicate one's life. Brings new difficulties into it, new troubles and calamities, where they did not before exist. The reason for this is that knowledge which is not in accordance with being cannot be large enough for, or sufficiently suited to, person's real needs. It will always be knowledge of one thing together with ignorance of another, a knowledge of detail without a knowledge of the whole. Knowledge of form without knowledge of essence. This preponderance of knowledge over being is observed in present-day culture. The idea of the value and importance of the level of being is completely forgotten, and it is also forgotten that the level of being determines the level of knowledge. At a given level of being, the possibilities of knowledge are actually limited and finite. Within the limits of a given being, the quality of knowledge cannot be changed, and the accumulation of information of one and the same nature, within already known limits, alone is possible. A change in the nature of knowledge is possible only with a change in the nature of being. Taken in itself, a person's being has many different sides. The most characteristic feature of modern man is the absence of unity in him, and the absence even of traces in him, of those properties that he most likes to ascribe to himself. Namely, his lucid consciousness, free will, a permanent ego or I, and the ability to do. The chief feature of a modern man's being, which explains everything else that is lacking in him, is sleep. A modern man lives in sleep he is born, and in sleep he dies. About sleep, its significance and its role in life we shall speak later. However, at present try just to imagine what knowledge a sleeping man might have, as compared to one who is fully awakened. If you think about it, and at the same time remember that sleep is the chief feature of our being, it should at once become clear that if a man really wants knowledge, then he must first think about how to awaken, that is, how to change his being. On the exterior, man's being has many different sides. Activity or passivity, truthfulness or a tendency to lie, sincerity or insincerity. Courage, cowardice, self-control, fantasy, profligacy, irritability, egoism, readiness for self-sacrifice. Pride, vanity, conceit, industry, laziness, morality, depravity, lust. All these and much besides make up the being of a man, but all this is entirely mechanical in man. If he lies, it means that he cannot help lying. If he tells the truth, it means that he cannot help telling the truth, and so it is with everything. Everything happens, and a man can do nothing either in himself or outside of himself. There are of course limits and boundaries, though generally speaking the being of modern man is of very inferior quality. It can in fact be of such poor quality that no change is possible, which has to be remembered. People whose being can still be changed are very fortunate, however there are others that are definitely diseased, broken machines with whom nothing can be done. Such people are in the majority. If you think about this, you will understand why only very few can receive real knowledge, their being prevents it. Generally speaking, the balance between knowledge and being is even more important than a separate development of either one or the other. A separate development of knowledge or of being is not desirable in any way, although it is precisely this one-sided development that often seems particularly attractive to people. If knowledge outweighs being, a man knows, but has no power to do. It is useless knowledge. On the other hand, if being outweighs knowledge, a man has the power to do, but does not know, that is, he can do something but he does not know what to do. The being he has acquired becomes aimless, and efforts made to attain it prove useless. In the history of humanity there are many examples where entire civilizations have perished, because knowledge outweighed being, or being outweighed knowledge. What are the results of the development of the line of knowledge without being, or the development of the line of being without knowledge? The development of the line of knowledge without the line of being gives a weak yogi, that is to say one who knows a great deal but can do nothing, a person who does not understand what they know. A person without appreciation, that is one for whom there is no difference between one kind of knowledge and another. The development of the line of being without knowledge gives a stupid saint, that is a person who can do a great deal, but who does not know what to do, or with what object. If they do anything they act in obedience to their subjective feelings, which may lead them astray and cause them to commit grave mistakes. To do the opposite in fact, of what they intended to do. In either case, both the weak yogi and the stupid saint are brought to a standstill, and neither one nor the other can develop further. In order to understand this and in general the nature of knowledge, the nature of being and their interrelation, it is necessary to understand the relation of knowledge and being to understanding. Knowledge is one thing and understanding is another. People often confuse these concepts and do not grasp what the difference between them is. Knowledge by itself does not give understanding. Nor is understanding increased by an increase of knowledge alone. Understanding depends upon the relationship of knowledge to being. Understanding is the resultant of knowledge and being. Knowledge and being must not diverge too far, otherwise understanding will prove too far removed from either. At the same time, the relation of knowledge to being does not change with a simple growth of knowledge. It changes only when being grows simultaneously with knowledge. In other words, understanding grows only with the growth of being. In ordinary thinking, people do not distinguish understanding from knowledge. They think that greater understanding depends upon greater knowledge, and therefore accumulate more and more knowledge, or that which they call knowledge. But they do not know how to accumulate understanding, and hence don't bother with it. Yet a person accustomed to self-observation knows with certainty that at different periods of their life, they have understood one and the same idea, one and the same thought, in totally different ways. It often appears strange to them that they could have understood wrongly that which, in their opinion, they now understand rightly, and realize at the same time that their knowledge has not changed, that they knew as much about the given subject before as they know now. What then changed? Their being has changed, and once being has changed, then understanding must also change. The difference between knowledge and understanding becomes clear when we realize that knowledge may be the function of one center. Understanding, however, is the function of three centers. Thus the thinking apparatus may know something, but understanding only appears when one feels and senses what is connected within. We have spoken about mechanicalness. A person cannot say that they understand the idea of mechanicalness, if they only know about it with their mind. They must feel it with their whole mass, with their whole being, and only then will they understand it. In the sphere of practical activity, people know very well the difference between mere knowledge and understanding. They realize that to know and to know how to do are two different things, and that knowing how to do is not created by knowledge alone. However, outside the sphere of practical activity, people do not understand clearly enough what understanding means. As a rule, when people realize that they do not understand a thing, they try to find a name for what they do not understand, and when they find a name for it, they say that they understand. However, to find a name does not mean to understand. Unfortunately, people are usually satisfied with names. One who knows a great many names, that is a great many words, is deemed to understand a great deal, again excepting of course any sphere of practical activity wherein ignorance very soon becomes evident. One of the reasons for the divergence between the line of knowledge and the line of being in life, a lack of understanding that is partly the cause and partly the effect of this divergence, is to be found in the language which people speak. This language is full of wrong concepts, wrong classifications and wrong associations. Then, owing to the essential characteristics of ordinary thinking, namely its vagueness and inaccuracy, every word can have thousands of different meanings, according to the material the speaker has at their disposal, and the complex of associations at work within them at that moment. People do not realize to what degree their language is subjective, and what different things each of them says, whilst using the exact same words. They are not aware that each of them speaks in a language all of their own, understanding other people's language either vaguely or not at all, and having no idea that each of them speaks in a language unknown to them. People have a firm conviction or belief that they speak the same language, and that they understand one another. This conviction actually has no foundation, and the language in which they speak is adapted to practical life only. People can communicate to one another information of a practical nature, however, as soon as they pass to a slightly more complex sphere, they are immediately lost, and cease to understand one another, although they are unconscious of it. People imagine that they often, if not always, understand one another, or that they can at any rate understand one another if they try or want to. They imagine that they understand the authors of the books that they read, and that other people understand them too. This also is one of the illusions that people create for themselves, in the midst of which they live. As a matter of fact, no one understands anyone else. Two people can say the same thing with profound conviction, but call it by different names, or argue endlessly together without suspecting that they are thinking exactly the same way, or vice versa. Two people can say the same words, imagine they agree and understand one another, whereas in actual fact they are saying totally different things, and do not understand one another at all. If we take the simplest words that occur constantly in speech and endeavor to analyze the meaning given to them, we shall see that at every moment in life, everyone puts into each word a special meaning that another can never put into it or suspect. Take for example the word man, and imagine a conversation among a group of people in which the word man is often heard. Without any exaggeration, it can be said that the word man will have as many meanings as there are people taking part in the conversation, and that these meanings will have nothing in common. When uttering the word man, everyone will involuntarily connect with this word the point of view from which they are generally accustomed to regard man, or from which for some reason or other, they regard him at that moment. One man at the moment may be occupied with the question of the relation between the sexes. Then the word man will have no general meaning for him, and on hearing this word he will first of all ask himself, which? Man or woman? Another may be religious and his first question will be, a Christian or not a Christian? The third may be a doctor and the concept man will mean for him a sick man or a healthy man, and of course, from the point of view of his speciality. A spiritualist will think of man from the point of view of his astral body, of life on the other side, and so on. He may say, if asked, that men are divided into mediums and non-mediums. A naturalist speaking of man will place at the center of his thoughts the idea of man as a zoological type. He will think of the structure of his teeth, his fingers, his facial angle and the distance between his eyes. A lawyer will see in man a statistical unit, or a subject for the application of laws, a potential criminal or a possible client. A moralist, in pronouncing the word man, will invariably introduce into it the idea of good and evil, and so on and so on. People do not notice all these contradictions, do not notice that they never understand one another and that they always speak about different things. It is quite clear that for a proper study, for an exact exchange of thoughts, an exact language is necessary. This would make it possible to establish what a person actually means, and would include an indication of the point of view from which a given concept is taken, determining the center of gravity of this concept. The idea is clear enough, and every branch of science endeavors to elaborate and to establish an exact language for itself, but there is no universal language. People continually confuse the language of different sciences, and can never establish their exact correlation. Even in each separate branch of science, new terminologies and new nomenclatures are constantly appearing, and the further it goes, the worse it becomes. Misunderstanding grows and increases instead of diminishing, and there is every reason to think this will continue to increase in the same way, with people understanding one another less and less. For exact understanding, an exact language is necessary, and the study of systems of ancient knowledge begins with the study of a language that makes it possible to establish immediately what is being said, from what point of view, and in what connection. This new language contains hardly any new terms or new nomenclature, however it bases the construction of speech upon a new principle, namely the principle of relativity. It introduces relativity into all concepts, thus making possible an accurate determination of the angle of thought, for what ordinary language lacks are expressions of relativity. When a person has mastered this language, then, with its help there can be transmitted and communicated to them a great deal of knowledge and information that cannot be transmitted in ordinary language, even using all possible scientific and philosophical terms. The fundamental property of this new language is that all ideas in it are concentrated around one idea, in other words, they are taken in their mutual relationship from the point of view of one idea. This idea is the idea of evolution. Evolution, of course, not in the sense of mechanical evolution, because such an evolution does not exist, but in the sense of a conscious and volitional evolution, which alone is possible.